I saw a really interesting post on Religion News last week about Christian infrastructure. By that term, we mean the collective organization of politics, charity, education, healthcare, and more. Well, as Christianity declines, that infrastructure is slowly eroding away. And there's good and bad aspects to it, and we're going to explore them today. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today is Friday, May 29th, 2026. This is Roll to Disbelieve, and I'm Captain Cassidy. Thank you for joining me. I'm a major history wonk, so I had a blast putting today's topic together for us. I hope you like it too. You know, the more I learn about the history and evolution of religion, the harder it is for me to take supernatural claims seriously. Like that old talk by Dr. Hector Avalos about how archaeology has killed biblical history. I'll link it in the write-up, of course, don't worry. In the talk, he describes how there is just no room in the archaeological record for the Bible's ancient stories to have occurred. And that's basically how I feel about religion. There's no room in reality for anything supernatural to be involved in religion. Everything about it is completely natural. It all has normal, natural explanations. And the more I find out about it, the less supernaturally mysterious any of it seems. Of course, I'm still intensely interested in the topic. Something doesn't have to be supernatural to be really fun to learn about. Just, I don't think fairies are involved anymore. Before we get going, let me thank my patrons and supporters. You make Roll to Disbelieve possible. Thank you so much. If you're hearing this and you're not one of them yet, I would love to have you on board too. To become a supporter, please check out the links at the end of today's write-up. It'll be on patreon.com under Roll to Disbelieve, one word, and at our official site, rolltodisbelieve.com. Thank you for whatever you decide to do. And now, our situation report. A tired old Christian claim gets my noggin joggin'. A while ago, I had an interesting Twitter exchange with a Christian. He wrote, "Christians gave us hospitals. Christians gave us universities. Christians gave us science. Christians built the West. Islam, atheism, and Judaism are trying to tear it down." I guess he's forgotten what religion gave rise to Christianity in the first place, but whatever. I wrote back, "Is it Christians or just Christian infrastructure built at a time when not being Christian could get you literally killed by Christians? Because I think you're having trouble with that distinction." Now, it's been a hot minute or two since I saw Christians arguing that their infrastructure proves that their religion is the best. But I guess nothing ever really leaves Christianity. As the joke goes, it's like a bachelor apartment. If something gets into it, it stays there forever. It never leaves. So there are probably some older evangelicals out there who think that the satanic panic is an ongoing concern. In truth, that infrastructure did arise out of Christianity, but it also could have arisen in any other major religion with vast temporal power. Christianity ain't special for having built schools or allowing scientists to work, or even running hospitals. That's stuff that world religions have been doing for quite some time. In fact, it's stuff every religion has done well before Christianity was even a glimmer in some inventive first-century wordsmith's eye. The thing is, though, no religion lasts forever. Christianity won't either. And once it's gone, what comes next? In a May 14th article for Religion News, Liz Bucar, a professor and author, covers what rising secularization means for Christianity's infrastructure. And again, that's not just their buildings. It's also political apparatus, community aspects, even religion's ability to draw large numbers of people together for really big projects. Today, let's go on a journey through the ancient world. Let's see what religious infrastructure looked like before Christianity. And then let's briefly explore the post-Christian world together. First, we're going to start off with the earliest history of religion. And I mean early. Humans didn't specifically evolve to be religious, contrary to what Christians might insist. They like to say humans have a God-shaped hole. But really, nowadays, I think it's more of a God-shaped wound inflicted by Christianity. That said, religion does play on a number of the mental quirks of our evolution. It rides, so to speak, on rails that developed long before for very different purposes. So in a real sense then, gods evolved alongside humans. As Barbara King wrote in Evolving God, quote, "To fully probe the origins of religion, we must look beyond even the first glimmers of human evolution to examine the emotional lives of the apes. And so I start the evolutionary clock earlier than do others who chart the origins of the religious imagination." Unquote. Indeed, our ability to imagine stuff that doesn't exist, which scientists call decoupled cognition, it may have influenced tool making. If I say a castle made of bananas, you've never seen one. You certainly know they are not possible. But you can imagine what it would look like, can't you? Well, guess what? Other animals really can't do that. As for tools, a toolmaker needs an idea in mind. They have to have a goal to reach using very humble starting materials. The rock in their hand, what can you do with it? Well, if you took off flakes here and there, it might turn into a good tool. And from there, our ability to imagine may have led us to the notion of spirits and afterlife and gods. Our linguistic abilities only helped us to transmit those ideas to others. Of course, this progression took a lot of time, maybe over 1 million years. But those early humans had all the time in the world. I'm not the only person who's ever seen religion as a force for cohesion in large groups. It's not even a provocative idea anymore. It's pretty mainstream. Ken Baskin wrote about it in 2018. Quote, "First, the challenge of every evolving species to know exactly what they must know to survive. And second, the challenge of every social species to encourage cooperation, even to the point of individuals giving up their lives. Even though their primary instinct is survival, the human response to these two challenges includes myth, which helps us to understand what we must know, and ritual, which encourages strong group ties and cooperation. When myth and ritual become integrated in human behavior, I speculate it might have been between 1.5 and 2 million years ago. They would provide the critical process by which the human social complexity skyrocketed as communities grew from bands of about 20 to cities of 20 million. Unquote. Other scholars, like those involved with a project called Seshat being an Egyptian goddess of record keeping, they suggest that when a civilization grows past about 1 million residents, moralizing gods begin to dominate their religious landscape. And these gods seem to grow in scope and power as the population grows. In this way, small-scale collective rituals can become really huge ones. Small gods grow into big gods, or they just supplant all those other smaller gods. Like Yahweh did. He was a small god in a big pantheon before he became the big god with no pantheon. Over time, those smaller gods just vanished in the West. We're not burying Sumanus' lightning anymore. Oh yeah, there was a European culture that when lightning hit the ground anywhere, they decided that the god Sumanus wanted that ground for himself, and so they would bury whatever happened to have been hit. That belonged to Sumanus now. And these big gods, as they're called, governed equally big civilizations. And in their long shadows, infrastructure proliferated. Before Christianity even existed, other civilizations, of course, practiced charity of all kinds. Even Hammurabi's Code, which was written in the 1700s BCE, provides for charity and debt relief. It focuses particularly on the protection of widows and orphans. Hammurabi ruled the old Babylonian Empire between about 1792 BCE to about 1750 BCE. The empire itself, the old Babylonian Empire, flourished between about 2000 BCE to about 1600 BCE. In turn, this was a cultural part of the overall Mesopotamian civilization, which ran from 3400 BCE to about 500 BCE. But before that legal code existed, one inscribed hundreds of years earlier, the Code of Ur-Nammu talks about similar protections. It says, quote, "The orphan was not delivered up to the rich man. The widow was not delivered up to the mighty man. The man of 1 shekel was not delivered up to the man of 1 mina." Unquote. And a mina, of course, being a large amount of money, and a shekel being very small. Like most ancient civilizations, Mesopotamians practiced hospitality toward strangers and charity for the poor. They had a strong sense of duty toward people who didn't have familial protection, and also for victims of misfortune. And accordingly, as you would suspect from all of that, the Babylonian Empire's temples weren't just religious centers. They also educated the children of nobles, and of course their own donated children. People would give their children to the temples, and they would grow up to be priests and scribes. And those temples also performed administrative tasks for the empire, and they distributed grain in times of famine. Even earlier than that, around 2100 BCE, ancient Egyptian rulers were proudly inscribing their charity efforts on their tomb walls. And then, of course, they decided the gods were very pleased with all of this. Here's what one guy wrote, quote, "I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. I anointed those who had no cosmetic oil. I gave sandals to the barefooted. I gave a wife to him that had no wife." Unquote. Bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked, sandals to the barefooted. This sounds a lot like Christianity, doesn't it? In ancient Athens, the eponymous archon, the chief leader of the city who had religious and civic functions, he bore responsibility for widows and orphans. In fact, Athenian law provided a number of protections for women and children who didn't have families to protect them. They even gave dowries to girls who grew up without parents who could give them a dowry. This was all going on before Christianity existed. But to hear Christians talk about it, they don't know anything about any of those protections or helps. In Sri Lanka, some of the earliest hospitals in the world got built around the 4th century BCE. Around the 1st century CE, so right when Christianity was getting rolling but long before it was widespread adopted, the Romans were building military hospitals. It took a while for people to build general hospitals rather than very specialized ones, but once we got going, we didn't stop. And around 300 CE in modern-day Iran, the first teaching hospital was founded. So Christianity really emerged at a critical time for world civilizations. Its vast infrastructure cannot be overestimated in importance to their local communities. Schools, orphanages, even senior care centers proliferated across Europe and beyond as it advanced. However, it would be inaccurate in the extreme to claim that the ancient world was just in awe of Christian charity. They weren't. In fact, citizens of the Roman Empire thought it was a little weird, a little bizarre, really off-putting to give anything to the destitute. In the 2nd century CE, the poet Lucian of Samosata even wrote a poem about a con artist who preyed on Christians. Yeah, he tricked them into giving him tons of money and revering him as a great teacher and spiritual leader. I want to say it was called The Passage of Peregrinus, and I do have a link in the write-up, of course. Despite all of those hurdles, Christians continued to focus on mutual aid, organized giving, and, of course, careful records of who got what from whom. About 1,800 years later, here we are. The artifacts of Christian infrastructure surround us in America, for good or ill. Way too many hospitals are run by religious groups that don't recognize America's protections for human rights. Christian-run orphanages and unwed mothers' homes still abound, many of them caught up in big scandals. Churches and religious schools, of course, dot the landscape, and numerous ministries exist only to clamor for temporal power in legislative halls. But fewer and fewer Christians are paying money into the vast Christian machine that pays for all that stuff. Some 25 years ago, my favorite coffee shop in Idaho was a beautiful converted church. The church had closed years earlier, and it sat empty for a little while. Some Christians eventually bought the building and turned it into a thriving business. Oh, it's beautiful, too. Those huge arched windows in the front, they let in the light, and they sensibly arranged everything to face those windows. Beautiful. They sold local art, too. I got some from there. Here's the thing, though. If buildings can be called lucky, well, this one was definitely lucky. There was another, smaller church just one street over from it, and it wasn't nearly as picturesque. Small, wooden, once painted white, little steps leading up to the door, very cute little church, but it wasn't as picturesque. It stood empty for many years. Finally, its new owner demolished it and turned the site into a convenience store and parking lot. It's gone now. Indeed, most churches that close will eventually experience the same fate. Nothing else can be done for them, and really nothing should. Their congregations have allowed their upkeep and maintenance to lapse so badly that really it's the safest thing to do is just tear the building down and start over with something else. It's much harder to say what can be done with the other massive infrastructure projects of Christianity. Some of them, like the hospitals, they can fund themselves. But many others depend on Christian giving, like Catholic parochial schools. They already face a funding crisis and fewer enrollments every year. My aunt the nun used to teach at a parochial, so I'm really familiar with that. A 2025 report from James Madison reveals that as Christian affiliation wanes, it's not just our imagination, so does charitable giving to religious groups with overtly religious missions. That said, the giving to secular groups has been increasing all the time. As we've been talking about, Christian infrastructure goes way past abandoned church buildings. That's the whole point Liz Bucar wants to make in that Religion News article. She's a spiritual but not religious person herself. She's not a Christian, but she's studied religious infrastructure and its effects on American society. Here's what she writes, quote, "Organized religion, for all its failures, knows how to show up. It has institutions, congregations, and email lists. It has spent decades building the kind of infrastructure that translates conviction into political action. That is why, when conservative Christians want the government to promote Christian values, they have organizations, lobbying arms, and school board slates ready to go. What do spiritual but not religious people have? Podcasters and social media influencers." Unquote. And well, she's right. The entire civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, it owes a lot of its success to Black church communities. White church communities largely stayed well out of it. And if you're interested in learning more about that, check out the groundbreaking book, The Gathering Storm in the Church. It's from 1969, but it's aged remarkably well for today. As I said, nothing really changes in Christianity. You'll figure that out quick if you read that book. That showing upness, that's also why the religious right has held onto a great deal of temporal power despite plummeting membership. Thanks to the endless politicization push of the 1970s and 80s, evangelicals vote. And the men, at least, vote reliably Republican. So religious organizations understand at a very basic level the nuts and bolts of the political process. And that understanding has stymied other movements that are trying to find solutions in government. Without a way to organize large numbers of people and persuade others en masse, secular movements are going to face an uphill battle against well-entrenched religious groups. Now, there are some secular people who join churches even though they're not religious. I've run into more than a few people who join for social reasons. I've even written about the alt-right Gen Z men who are joining really conservative churches basically for the aesthetics. But for most people, joining a church is out of the question when we don't accept Christian claims. And to her credit, let me make this clear, Bukar's not suggesting that we all get our asses to church. Rather, she's kind of wondering if maybe secular people can figure out a way to create new infrastructure that scales larger than just the individual experience. She writes, quote, "We have borrowed the most individually appealing parts of religious practice, the meditation, the ritual, the transcendence, and left behind everything that felt like a duty, or commitment, or accountability, or even community that makes demands on you. The obligation to show up even when you don't feel like it. The sense that your spiritual life is bound up with other people's. The spiritual but not religious Americans I've interviewed for my research are often the most thoughtful people I've met when it comes to meaning, mortality, ethics, and human flourishing. They've thought hard about how to live. What they haven't figured out is how to translate that wisdom into anything that scales." Unquote. We could definitely quibble about exactly how much commitment, accountability, community that makes demands, the obligation to show up. We could definitely argue about how wonderful any of that is. I don't think much of it is. That said, the point is, religion might have served humanity very well once. It allowed us to build huge cities and sprawling infrastructure all over the world. But we're in a new world now, one that is crying out for different solutions. And what Christianity's offering increasingly looks like an answer in search of a problem that no longer exists. I'm just hoping that whatever we come up with in the post-Christian age works better than Christianity did. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Next up, we are going to veer into the bleeding modern edge of news. The modern AAA video gaming industry. Yes, we have a gaming post next, because they just offered a potent set of lessons for Christian leaders that I don't think they're going to understand, much less ever want to implement. We'll talk about that more next time. For now, this is Captain Cassidy signing off. Please have a marvelous weekend, and we'll see you soon.